You want me to keep time? Our battles will be hard. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in a knife fight and we'll need our sharpest weapons. But more than anything, the toughest fights will demand that we bring our whole selves. We must bring energy and determination. We must bring clarity of purpose and a richer understanding of our common goals. We must bring a deep down commitment that will sustain us even when the fight looks impossibly hard. This book is not a campaign memoir. It's not a rehash of big public events. It's a book about the fight that lies ahead. It's about the plans we need, no surprise there, and it's about much more than plans. It's about the passion and commitment that underlie those plans and the human connection that will keep us in this fight until we see real change. I write knowing with absolute certainty that if we fail to make major changes, we will plunge our nation and our planet into an abyss from which we cannot escape. I also write with a deep thrum of optimism that we are in a moment when extraordinary changes are possible. Much is broken in this country. More than 74 million Americans voted to return Donald Trump to the White House, even as he left our government, our reputation, and even our faith in each other torn and ragged. In January 2021, his followers stormed the Capitol in an effort to stop the peaceful transition of power that has been a hallmark of our nation from its creation. But even in the darkest hours, I have never stopped believing in the strength of our democracy. Even when hatred has flared and hissed, I have never stopped believing in our capacity to create a better country based on the values we share. I believe right down to my toes that we can build a nation that expands opportunities, a nation that works, not just for the rich and powerful, but for everyone. As I lay sleepless under the covers on election night, I thought about why the fight for change matters so much to me. Why do federal laws and policies wake me up in the morning and keep me up at night? Why do I wade into one battle after another? Why do I get back up after a god-awful loss, ready to charge ahead again? Because for me, like the thousands of people I met during my campaign for president, this fight is personal. I bring the pieces of who I am to every battle. I'm a mother and a teacher. I'm a planner, a fighter, and a learner. And, Elizabeth Warren writes, I'm a woman. Together, these pieces furnish the foundation for everything I do. They are the lenses through which I see much of this world. They drive me to fight for millions of other people. They make me strong. The stories in this book come straight from my heart to yours. I share them in the hope that they will give spark to the battles you wage and keep you grounded in the righteous fights. And then we go to chapter 1. This is where the book kind of formally starts, titled A Mother. I first walked into a classroom as a bona fide teacher in September 1970, and by January or so, I was settling in. The butterflies I'd felt in the first few weeks were gone. I'd figured out lesson plans, figured out the supply closet, figured out parent conferences, the drop-offs and the pickups, and figured out the pecking order in the all-important teacher's coffee room. I was a first-year teacher at Riverdale Elementary School in Riverdale, New Jersey. I loved these children, and I loved this work. Finally, here I was, 21 years old, doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. I grew up in Oklahoma, the baby girl in a family of boys. Like every other girl I knew, I was sure I would go to high school, learn to drive a car, get married, and have kids. I knew the plan. Living that plan was what it meant to grow up. But I had one more part to my plan, to teach school. Since second grade, I'd wanted to be a teacher. When my teacher, Mrs. Lee, had put me in charge of extra reading practice with a handful of second graders, I was hooked. There would be no stopping me. For years, I lined up my dollies, Terry Lee, Susie, Sammy, Tanny, Tammy, nursey lady, the storybook dolls, and all the rest, and taught school for hours and hours. Of course, Sammy was always the bad boy, and the storybook dolls were empty-headed, but I wasn't discouraged. I kept right on teaching. The road had been bumpy. My mother didn't want me to go to work. Just marry a man who's a good provider, she said. We didn't have money for college. College is for other people, she said. I found out a way to go.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings on the beginning of a new week. We've got a lot coming up in the program today. In our third hour, Jen Senko is going to be with us for conversations with great minds about her new book, The Brainwashing of My Dad. There's a documentary of the same title. Multiple crazy alerts today. Fox News defends Christopher Columbus celebrating the ethnicity of America. And pigeons are government-issued drones, really? Tom Carpenter is going to be with us in the second hour talking about the growing nuclear risk up here in the Northwest. I mean, we've got a serious problem up at Hanford. And I want to get into Kirsten Sinema's political career and what it says about Citizens United and our republic. But I want to start out with a kind of a follow-on to an op-ed that I published back on September 20th titled "Santa Claus is About to Drop a Bomb on Biden." You'll recall back on March 6, 1976, in the Wall Street Journal, Republican political strategist Jude Wanniski published a piece in which he said, the only thing wrong with the U.S. economy is the failure of the Republican Party to play Santa Claus. And he built this case that Democrats were beloved. This was in 76. The Republican Party was in complete wreckage. Jerry Ford couldn't even beat a peanut farmer for president, an unknown peanut farmer at that, all because of the Nixon bribery scandals and everything else. And so he said in the Wall Street Journal, the reason Republicans keep losing elections is because Democrats are viewed as Santa Claus. They brought us Medicare, they brought us Medicaid, they brought us unemployment insurance, they brought us minimum wage, they brought us all this stuff, and the Republicans said no to every single thing. And he said Republicans have to become Santa Claus, and they have to force Democrats to shoot Santa Claus. And so he laid out a very simple process for this. He literally, Jude Wanniski invented this phrase, supply-side economics, flipped economics on its head and said it's not wages that drive an economy, it's the number of goods and services that are available, supply-side economics. And therefore, when a Republican is in office, it's incumbent on them to, number one, radically cut taxes, and number two, radically increase spending to drive up the deficit as much as possible. This will produce a couple of outcomes. Number one, it'll stimulate the economy, so Americans will think Republicans produce good economies. Number two, it will drive up the debt so that, number three, when Democrats come into office, we can squeal about the debt. And sure enough, Ronald Reagan came into office with an $800 billion national debt. He tripled it to $2.6 trillion by the time he left office, mostly with a giant tax cut. There were also some spending increases. His tax cut, if you carry it out, and this was predicted at the time, in fact, by conservatives in the New York Times, that if Reagan's tax cut stayed in place over the next 20 years, it would add $10 trillion to the U.S. debt. And sure enough, it did. And then George W. Bush came along, did the same thing, added another arguably $6 or $7 trillion to the national debt, about $5 trillion with two illegal wars and $2 to $3 trillion with his tax cuts, although his tax cuts are still with us, so there's still, a few more trillion there. And then, of course, Donald Trump added somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 to $6 trillion over the next 10 or 15 years with his tax cuts, $1.5 trillion immediately. And yet, during every Democratic administration, the Republicans suddenly are worried about this $20 trillion debt that is almost entirely attributable to 3 massive Republican tax cuts and 2 illegal Republican wars. And so it's like, and it's been so effective. During the Clinton administration, they were screaming about the national debt that Reagan had run up. They were actually able to get Clinton to declare an end to welfare as we know it and the end of the era of big government. I mean, it actually worked, just like Jude Wanniski predicted in the Wall Street Journal in 1976. And it worked again with Barack Obama. Got him to talk about chaining the CPI and cutting Social Security until his base stopped him. And they're at it again. On the line with us is Jennifer Stefano, the Republican strategist, vice president of the Commonwealth Foundation, fellow with the Independent Women's Forum, IWF.org, CommonwealthFoundation.org, and you can tweet her at Jennifer Stefano. Jennifer, welcome back. While progressive leaders eat cake, their constituents suffer, I think is the name of your piece today. Tell us about your concerns.
All right, well, I love that you had brought up Senator Elizabeth Warren, because I just recently her two-income trap, and I think she laid out both the concern and the solution that I'm writing about when I'm calling out people like AOC who want to soak the rich, but love nothing more than being with rich progressives. Believe me, at the Metropolitan Gala, there are no conservatives invited in. So you have these extremely expensive events. None of the elites wear a mask. The workers are forced to wear a mask. The workers could likely lose their jobs if they don't get vaccinated, but everybody else doesn't have to. So first, it's just that endless hypocrisy that we see, that the rules are for thee but not me. It's very problematic to most Americans, regardless of their political persuasion. But back to Senator Warren, what's more frustrating is instead of AOC putting on a dress saying, let's soak or tax the rich, why doesn't she actually put government money where it belongs, which is into the hands of the people? And the best way to do that is put education funding into the hands of the parents. And Elizabeth Warren laid this whole plan out to do exactly that via educational savings accounts and scholarships, and then inside the public sector allow for total freedom of choice. So there are no more boundaries drawn by.
Right. So I get it. You're pitching charter schools here. Let's privatize education after, George W. Bush succeeded in now 40% privatization of Medicare with the Medicare Advantage scam. And I get it. Republicans want to privatize everything. But, the piece that you sent us, starts out, our economic recovery from the COVID shutdown is still in its infancy. Policies that incentivize gainful employment, reduce regulatory barriers, let innovators fairly compete, and rein in government overreach are not genius ideas. Those are all, as you well know, Jennifer, conservative code words for we want to cut taxes on rich people even farther, and we want to deregulate government so that big corporations can pollute even more as long as it keeps them profitable. I mean, you're just playing out Jude Wanniski's two Santa Claus theory here, yelling about the Democrats spending money and saying we got to cut taxes and privatize our schools while we're at it.
So what do you care whether a school's public or private if children are being helped? What do you care how?
Because public schools are more efficient. Because when somebody is sucking 20% off the top to make a buck, or when somebody's trying to pitch their own particular corporate shtick or religious shtick on the kids of our country, our entire country suffers. That's why.
Like the teachers' unions. You mean the way they suck money out of the system? Let me give you a quick example.
Yes, I think people are entitled to be unionized.
Excuse me. Heads of the teachers' union in Pennsylvania, in the city of Philadelphia, which is overseeing some of the worst failed schools in the country, the head of the teachers' union is paid taxpayer dollars. He hasn't been in the classroom in 30 years. You want to talk about sucking things away from the classroom, from public education? Let me just.
That's because he's running a union.
We'll start there. When you guys stop bending a knee to them because they pour their political money into the Democratic Party, you talk about rich.
Well, that's because the Democratic Party supports public education, and the Republican Party says, oh, no, let's turn it all over to the free market and let the billionaires run our schools. And it's like, thank you for a disaster. Our public schools, Jennifer, maybe one thing we can agree on. When public schools became a thing in the 1890s, one of the big, and it started in Boston, as you probably know, and spread across the country. Horace Mann was the big evangelist for it. But a lot of cities that had black populations in them, but white power structures, said, we don't want to be paying for those black schools. And so what they did is they set up a system where education is paid for by local property taxes, so that poor neighborhoods and black neighborhoods would continue to have poor schools, and wealthy neighborhoods could continue to have and build on really nice schools. Why don't we just stop paying for schools with a property tax and start paying them out of the general fund?
First, why don't you go back to the fact that Horace Mann created the public system that he did to keep out all the Catholics, the great unwashed.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It was to break the back of the Catholics in Boston. You're absolutely right.
He absolutely wanted to keep the Catholics out. Okay, so that's
no, it wasn't
to
keep them out. It was to destroy their political power. But yeah, I'm with you.
So you get what I'm saying, right? So
yeah, I'm familiar with the history. I wrote a book about it.
And so let's just be really clear. This was all about power, and it's still a cartel built around and off the backs of children. Tom, let's both agree that what we want, what you want, what I want, and what I think generally every Democrat and Republican wants, is to truly see all children thrive. Now, we can spend hours talking about the history of the system, but I'm not going in that direction, and neither are our children. And that's all of our children, regardless of color or gender or what have you. What we have been doing is funding failure. Education money continues.
We have not. There are great public schools in this country, Jennifer. They just happen to be in communities that have fairly high property taxes because they've got high property values. But the simple fact of the matter, here's the one thing, Jennifer, if I could just put this on the table, and then you can go as far as you want with this. Well, actually, we have 2 minutes. If we're talking public schools, people have control over that. They join the local school board, and they can control their local school. With private schools, you've got some corporation running the school.
First of all, they have no power. Look at all the people going nuts because their kids weren't back in school or their kids aren't masked or they are masked. There's no power. The power comes with the money. The money should go to the parent. Look out for a big government spending program. I think, like Elizabeth Warren wrote in her book, that we should take every penny, certainly of state education dollars, and give it directly to the parents, particularly low-income parents of color.
Elizabeth Warren is not an advocate for charter schools. Please don't try to make her into one.
And what they want to do with their babies. Why you, a white man, got to step in and do that? Let's give them the money. Let them make the decision. I don't need to be told how to educate my child. And it's not right or fair that if I have the money, I can put my kid in a school that I want. But a poor woman, particularly maybe a woman of color, but certainly a low-income woman, can't have the same decision.
Right. So let's fix the tax system.
Give that money to the parents. Parental choice.
Let's have our schools funded out of the statewide general funds so that all schools across the state have equal funding.
They are. There's plenty of money.
They're not. They're funded by local property taxes.
Some of it, there's a percentage from federal government, local government, state government.
It's relatively small.
And in fact, in states like Pennsylvania, there is infinitely more state spending in poor districts to compensate for that. That's why the state got involved, and we do pay for it.
I just don't understand, Jennifer, why you would want to turn the education of your children over to a corporation.
Oh, no. Why would I turn it over to a bunch of government bureaucats, a bunch of teachers?
Because they work for us. Because you can run for the school board and actually be elected and be in charge. You can't run for the board of directors of a for-profit education corporation.
That's a ridiculous statement. The vast majority of schools are profit, they're nonprofit. The Catholics have outperformed.
Even nonprofits are corporations. You're not going to, Jennifer, the Catholic Church won't even let you in as a priest, much less to run a school.
Why would I want to be? And let me just say, put the money in the hands of the parents. That's where the power is.
Okay, Jennifer Stefano, Republican strategist, vice president of the Commonwealth Foundation, fellow of the Independent Women's Forum. CommonwealthFoundation.org is the website. They also publish out an email newsletter, which I got this morning. It's a good one. Jennifer Stefano on Twitter. Jennifer, thank you for dropping by. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. I got to tell you about Kirsten Sinema right after this. And welcome back. Dave in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, thanks for watching this on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Mr. Stefano wants me to vote Republican, is driving me to vote Republican.
I'm sorry, say it again?
When the Republicans are in power, I don't have to worry about Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin. I don't have to worry about the debt crisis. I feel like
when Republicans are in power, you only have to worry about being lied into a war and having your economy gutted so that all of your money can be handed off to a few billionaires.
Well, I don't. I feel like I'm giving in to my Stockholm syndrome. I'm going to have to vote Republican next time.
Yeah, right.
And women like her who have a brain aren't given an inch.
Like who?
Like the guest that you just had on, Mr.
Oh no, yeah, I mean,
she definitely is smart.
She's working for the right-wing billionaires. What do you expect?
Okay. But I'm just saying, I think we're all Stockholm syndromes.
How so?
I think. Well, if the Democrats if the Republicans even get close with their threat to getting close to discounting the dollar, it'll cause a recession that will then be
We don't
blamed
have
with.
no president has the ability to discount the dollar. The only thing that can affect the value.
Well, I'm
of the
saying
dollar.
the Republicans are by bringing us to a default.
Oh, I see.
You know, it's only been put off to December 3rd.
Right.
We don't. The Democrats don't play these games, and the Republicans are in power. But the Republicans are threatening all of us. And
right. So I'm baffled, Dave. You're pointing out that the Republicans behave in a way that, shall we say, lacks honor and harms the country. But then you're going to have to vote Republican next time. What am I missing here?
Well, I would like to see a president going to West Virginia and Arizona. Calling these two senators out, which are weakening the Democratic Party.
Yeah, he's
and looking for primary components personally.
I think though that could cause him to lose the Senate. You know, Joe Biden's only had one ambassador confirmed because Ted Cruz has put a hold on all his ambassador positions. Like the whole federal government is filled with giant holes that Donald Trump drilled in.
Again, that's why I think we're all Stockholm victims.
I'm fighting back.
I mean, we had.
I'm not agreeing with my captors.
FDR has said he welcomes their hatred. That's what we need at this point in time.
Right. I agree. But, you know, they does not include Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin right now. Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are Democrats. I mean, I think it's important to point out what they're doing and why, but I also think it's important not to push them out of the party. If you do, you're handing the Senate to the Republicans tomorrow morning. You really want to do that?
I mean, the U.S. having a debt default when it's the reserve currency is right out of a Batman episode of the '60s.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah, Mitch McConnell is the Joker.
Out of Get Smart.
Or is he the juggler?
Right. Yeah. It's the chaos out of Get Smart.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the level that they're playing at, and if the Democrats are going to continue to call them my friends, I don't know. I think we're all Stockholm victims.
It's a rhetorical device. But I would, Dave, I think to the point, I would agree that I would like to see Chuck Schumer being a little more active. But, you know, what can you say? I'm not Chuck Schumer, and I don't have any control over him. Dave, thank you for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Fascinating backstory here on Kyrsten Sinema. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about Big Mail-In. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, you know, when you hear from Americans that, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, I've got all the details on this video over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. But, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. Welcome back. It is Indigenous Peoples Day, by the way, and the president has issued just an absolutely elegant statement about that. He becomes the first American president to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. Donald Trump, for the 4 years of his presidency, refused to do so. This was put into place back at the end of the Obama administration. And this is so sweet. He says, for generations, federal policies systematically sought to assimilate and displace Native people and eradicate Native cultures. We recommit to supporting a new, brighter future of promise and equity for tribal nations. It's marvelous. So, Kirsten Sinema, this is absolutely fascinating. Sinema, as you know, and as we've discussed on the program, started out as a social worker, then went on to the Arizona State House of Representatives, then on to the Arizona State Senate, and then ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012. And when she did, a commercial, the guy who was running against her, Vernon Parker, ran this incredible commercial against her. Here's a clip from it. Maybe not. Anyhow, it came right out and said that she was a radical left-wing activist promoting hatred toward our country, our allies, and our families, and warning people that she was engaged in pagan rituals. So after this happens, Sinema gets into the House. I mean, it took 6 days before the AP could even call the race. It initially looked that tight. It turned out it wasn't that tight. Ultimately, she won by about the same percentage that Obama did in her district, but it looked that way in the beginning. And so she gets into the House of Representatives and immediately jumps into the Problem Solvers Caucus. It was brought to us by Wall Street funded groups like No Labels. And quietly and without a lot of fanfare, she starts voting with the Republicans and the corporate and billionaire-owned Democrats, supporting their efforts to deregulate big banks, to, quote, reform Social Security and Medicare, to make it harder for the government to protect regular investors or even buyers of used cars. In her first year, 2013, she voted with the chamber 77% of the time. And the next year, 2014, when she was up for her first re-election for the House, she was one of only 5 Democrats endorsed by the chamber. This is what Citizens United has done to America. In my op-ed today over Hartmann Report titled "Sinema's Reign Shows How Political Corruption Can Destroy America Like Metastasized Cancer," I quote at considerable length from Justice Stevens' dissent in Citizens United, where he basically predicted that this was exactly what would happen. In fact, he said that it would cause people, he said the predictable result is cynicism and disenchantment, when people see that their members of Congress are bought off. And he predicted today.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He went on to say, politicians who fear that a certain corporation can make or break their re-election chances may be cowed into silence about that corporation or participation with it. Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot. Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces, under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So just to quickly recap, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Sinema was a progressive right up until she ran for the U.S. House of Representatives and nearly got trounced by a Republican with massive amounts of money coming in. And then just like hooked up with the big money people in Washington, D.C., the No Labels Group and the Blue Dog Caucus and whatnot, started taking money from corporations and started voting with the Chamber of Commerce, and so they even endorsed her. And I think that this ad that she confronted in the 2012 election, the first time she ran for Congress, for the House of Representatives, is probably, emblematic of what might have caused her to say, wait a minute, do I really want to fight these guys or do I want to join them? Here's the last 25, 30 seconds of it.
And perhaps the weirdest of all, Sinema participated in pagan rituals, singing and spiraling during an anti-war protest. Kirsten Sinema is not a garden variety liberal Democrat. It's far, far worse. Kirsten Sinema is a radical left-wing activist who promoted hatred toward our country, our allies, and our families. We can't let her anywhere near Congress.
Imagine if you're running for Congress and somebody's running an ad like that saying that you hate American families, you hate American values, you're trashing the country, you're a hippie, you engage in pagan ritual. At that point, what do? Well, Citizens United, as I said, Citizens United opened the door for this. And, for a person to say, well, okay, I'm going to win the next time, but I'm going to do it, the way that is now kind of the official law of the United States. I'm going to do it with money from giant corporations and right-wing billionaires. And, Citizens United, of course, doubled down on corporate personhood. And John Paul Stevens says all general business corporation statutes appear to date from well after 1800. In other words, there were no corporations in the modern form when the Constitution was written. But nonetheless, he said the framers thus took it as a given that corporations would be comprehensively regulated in the service of the public welfare. Unlike our conservative colleagues on the bench, he said, actually, he just said, unlike our colleagues, the founders, had little trouble distinguishing corporations from human beings. And when they constitutionalized the right to free speech in the First Amendment, it was the free speech of individual Americans they had in mind. The fact that corporations are different from human beings, Stevens wrote in his dissent in Citizens United, might seem to need no elaboration, except that the majority opinion almost completely elides it, or ignores it, or sets it aside. Unlike natural persons, corporations have limited liability, perpetual life, favorable treatment, and accumulation of assets. Unlike voters in U.S. elections, corporations may be foreign controlled. And he goes on and on through this. And then he says, the biggest problem of the fact that in 2010, officially by law, because of the Supreme Court, it became legal for billionaires and right-wing corporations to buy politicians like Kirsten Sinema. He says, in addition to the immediate drowning out of non-corporate voices, there may be deleterious effects that follow soon thereafter. And here we are, 11 years out. Tell me that he wasn't prescient. It's like this guy had a time machine. He died in 2019, so you can't ask him now. But how did you know, Justice Stevens? He says, corporate domination of electioneering. This is from the Citizens United dissent. You can read it over at the Supreme Court website. Corporate domination of electioneering can generate the impression that corporations dominate our democracy. When citizens turn on their televisions and radios before an election and hear only corporate electioneering, they may lose faith in their capacity as citizens to influence public policy. A government captured by corporate interests, they may come to believe, will be neither responsive to their needs nor willing to give their views a fair hearing. Gee, are we there yet? I mean, it's like, look at everything that's in the Build Back Better bill. 70% of people in Arizona want that. But not Kirsten Sinema because she's taking money from these giant corporations. So again, back to Justice John Paul Stevens in his dissent in Citizens United in 2010, quote, the predictable result is cynicism and disenchantment, an increased perception that large spenders call the tune, and a reduced willingness of voters to take part in democratic governance. To the extent that corporations are allowed to exert undue influence in electoral races, the speech of the eventual winners of those races, keep in mind Kirsten Sinema in 2012, a liberal running for Congress, the speech of the eventual winners of those races may also be chilled. And then he goes on to say, on a variety of levels, unregulated corporate electioneering might diminish the ability of citizens to hold officials accountable to the people. Gee, are we seeing that right now? And disserve the goal of a public debate that is uninhibited, robust, and wide open. In my mind, the only way to deal with this is to blow up Citizens United. And the Citizens United part of politics was blown up by the For the People Act, H.R. 1. But, you know, as long as the filibuster's in place, there's no possibility that's going to pass. And even if the filibuster was removed, in all probability, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema would vote against it. Although you never know. I mean, it would help them, if they remain Democrats, it would help them moving forward. So, who knows? Who knows? Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, guess who the #1 advocate for the implementation of inherent contempt is? It's you. Remember last Friday when you said that the sergeant of arms, you don't have no kick outside of Washington, D.C. When that select committee, if they were to send out subpoenas to Jim Jordan, Kevin McCarthy, Josh Hawley, or whomever had conversations with the president on January the 6th, should they defy those subpoenas? You're right. If they go back to their home states, and nothing we can do. But if they're in Washington taking votes, they can be arrested. Now, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, I called you up. I was just messing with you. When I told you that my brother-in-law got a contract, remember that, to revamp the jail where they got the President Lincoln's carriage?
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. What happened?
Well, I was just messing with you. You know, I told you I was messing with you. Well, it should come to pass now. Now, here's what we need to do, because these guys are playing hardball, Republicans. We're playing softball. We're trying to save democracy. They're trying to promote fascism. And you know your boy Lewis Powell is just smiling in his grave right now. What we need to do is get Papa Joe on TV to let him tell the whole world that nobody is above a subpoena. And you just got through talking about how the guy in France got busted, and he was the chief executive over there. It took him a while, but they got him.
Yeah.
So Papa Joe get on TV, letting everybody know that nobody is above a subpoena, okay? And the select committee, they don't need to course blessing on this one. I want you to talk about it when I get off the air. They don't need to course blessing on this one. Now, they're not going outside of Washington.
You're talking about inherent contempt.
I'm talking about inherent contempt, but you're the #1 advocate. Pick them up if they're in Washington, D.C., right, and the select committee gets wind that they had a conversation with Donald Trump.
What are you going to do, lock them in the bathroom? I mean, there's no jail in the Capitol building anymore.
Well, I'll tell you what we do. Since they're first-class people, we'll put them in a hotel with security.
Okay, all right. But, you know, I'm not, well, it's a good question. You know, this is the kind of thing that probably Jamie Raskin would be good at. Maybe we can get him on the program to talk about, because he's a constitutional law professor, and he's the guy who's saying we should use inherent contempt, and it doesn't.
Go ahead, Jamie Raskin. Go ahead, Jamie Raskin. Now, here's a lawyer. Well, I know it's a lawyer, but my grandmother called them lawyers. Go ahead, Jamie Raskin, because like you said it. You said it, Professor. You put the nail in it. If they are in Washington, D.C., and they defy a subpoena from a congressional select committee, pick them up.
Yeah. Have the sergeant at arms go get him. Okay, I'm with you, Morris. Thank you. We're going to get Jamie Raskin on if he's willing to come on the program or has the time and find out what the details of this. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, Tommy, your guest seemed like she was playing a complete non sequitur to your interview, but she was really demonstrating exactly what the Republican Santa Claus does, which is to say, you shouldn't get just what Santa Claus wants you to have. That's what the Democrats do. You should get whatever you want to choose. You see, it's this idea that you have a right to choices, and therefore they use the power of government, the power of taxation, to then put private or public money into private hands. That's exactly what she was talking about in terms of charter schools, which they want to call public schools, and they're not. And as you aptly pointed out, Medicare Advantage is the same thing, where they use the power of school taxes to then distribute it into private hands, and then the fact that you have to pay FICA taxes, then put it into Medicare Advantage. Neither one is. And I wonder if this would be the case. If we were to, and by the way, 24 centuries ago, Aristotle said, liberty requires neither unlimited choices nor unlimited wealth. That's just so. This is old stuff. But I wonder, in terms of charter schools, I've thought this: if you had to make your choice at the level of funding, that is, if you had an option as to where you pay your school taxes, you have to pay school taxes. Okay, everybody has, and however much you have to pay, we won't change that. But we'll say you can choose to pay your, let's say, whatever, $2,000 a year into the public school, or you can put it into, you know, Acme Learning. And at that level, let's see how many of those charter schools actually exist. How many people would actually choose to put their taxes into those schools, and then so that you could actually go there. Right. The fact of the matter is, you see, they are actually robbing it. They really are robbing it.
Oh,
and then what they do, of course, as you pointed out, is the big borrow so that the economy looks like it's going great because all of the money that the rich should be putting into the economy, they're sitting on in their securities, and it looks like the economy coming along while the debt's getting towards $30 trillion. And this is kind of like why the economy feels good is because it's kind of like doing drugs so that you don't feel hungry. You know, you can shoot up or toot up or whatever you want to do, and you won't ever have to eat. You'll never feel hungry, but you will be really emaciated. I mean, that's why.
Yeah, ask any tweaker.
Exactly right. And so if you take the borrowing out of it, and the rich don't have to spend their money in the economy. See, they want to sit on their money so that they can create these political war chests to basically, pay for the ones who would never make them pay. And
I totally get it, Paul. Yeah, I thought we had booked Jennifer. In fact, the literature that I had was about how, the Democrats are engaging in irresponsible spending. But I think with my setup, I warned her about that, and she decided not to go there and change the subject on me. Anyhow, Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Back with more of your calls in just a minute. What do we do about this, right? It seems like we need legislation. I don't know a better solution. And welcome back. Let's see here. Mike in Wycliffe, Ohio. Hey, Mike, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, good day to you. I think, just to be short here, you could have countered Betsy DeVos Jr. with the ECOT scandal in the state of Ohio.
Tell me about that, Mike. You live in Ohio. I don't know anything about it.
Well, it's very easy to find in the Columbus Dispatch, where the electronic classroom of tomorrow, which was started by Bill Lager, who contributed heavily to the Republicans in the state of Ohio, the state, one of the most corrupt states in the union, run by Republicans, where they stiffed the taxpayers here of $80 million. So you could have pointed that out to I'll call her Betsy DeVos Jr., and they're still arguing the case in court, and as one of their lawyers said, well, if we just give the money back to the state, they'll just spend it on something stupid. Just to show the people how corrupt a lot of these phony voucher schools are, we could show that lady the ECOT, the electronic classroom of tomorrow.
Okay, the electronic classroom of tomorrow. I'll mental note made, Mike. Thank you very much for that. Phil in Salinas, California. Hey, Phil, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I think that Jennifer gal,
yeah,
she needs to tell us whether she's on a voucher system in her state or whether she's
I think she was. Well, I don't know, but why? Why do we have to personalize these things? Why can't we just debate them in the abstract?
Well, listen, to me, I think the vouchers need to be outlawed because what it does is it robs public schools of their money, and it would make them better. And the voucher, if somebody wants to send their kid to private school, well, let them fund that to themselves and not take money out of the public coffers to run the public
Well, it's
school.
always been that way. I mean, up until the last, really since the Bush administration in a big way, the George W. Bush administration, up until the last 20 years, It was basically, wealthy people sent their kids to private schools like Ted Cruz does, to a $20,000 a year school where the kids all have to wear masks. And regular people send their kids to public schools. And Catholics send their kids to Catholic schools. I mean, those were the three kind of categories out there. And now we've got these corporate schools.
Well, the reason they do that is they want to keep people dumb.
I don't think so. I think it's because they really...
I think they want to keep their voters dumb, ignorant.
Well, that's the consequence, and it's an upside for them. But I think it's mostly they want people to make money. They want somebody to make money off everything that we, the people, do.
Yeah, well, yeah. They only want their friends to make money.
Right. Well, those are the friends that cycle the campaign donations back to them and get them reelected. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, absolutely. It's a scam, Phil. It's a scam. Phil, thanks a lot for the call. Amen. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties, for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back, Tony in Chicago. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
First of all, thank you for your show. I love it.
Thank you.
But I have a question. So, since the Republicans and Joe Manchin and Christian Sinema is trying to do everything to stop the Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure plan from going through, if it does not go through, then will the debt in turn go down? And if that's the case, can the Democrats then turn that on the Republicans and then use that as part of campaigning, hey, we made the debt go down?
Yeah. The short answer is no. None of that will work, Tony. Here's why. First of all, the debt, Donald Trump ran up $8 trillion worth of debt in his 4 years as president. That is the debt that they have to raise the debt ceiling to pay off. So, number one, it's not about what's going forward. This is not, I realize that the Republicans are out there saying the Democrats have to raise the debt ceiling so they can spend money. But that's simply a lie. It's just a plain old flat out lie, number one. Number two, the Build Back Better plan does not borrow any money at all. Even though it's a $3.5 trillion plan, it literally does not borrow a cent. It raises taxes on people making over $400,000 a year up to 27%, which is lower than they were when Donald Trump came into office. It establishes a corporate minimum tax, and it raises corporate taxes. I'm forgetting the number right off the top of my head, but it raises it 2 or 3 points into the low 30s, which again is below where it was when Trump came into office. But because this is spread out over 10 years and it's only a couple $100 billion a year, that amount of revenue, that amount of tax revenue, even though it's less than what was given away by the Trump tax cuts, fully pays for this legislation. So the Build Back Better plan does not add to the national debt. In fact, if anything, let me just add 1 point here, Tony, and then back to you. When we came out of World War II, when Dwight Eisenhower became president in 1952, we were at 127% of GDP. It was the highest the national debt had ever been. It was about where it is right now. Dwight Eisenhower borrowed even more money and built the National Highway System. That National Highway System, that giant infrastructure project, generated so much economic activity across the nation that the added taxes on all that economic activity paid down the national debt. And the same thing will happen again.
Well, that's great, because so I'm expecting that the debt will go down under Democratic rule as usual, because it always goes up under Republican rule as usual. So thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tony. Good to hear from you. Danny in Waco, Texas. Hey, Danny, what's up?
Yeah, when you were talking about the charter school and that Medicare Advantage, those both to me, they just come off as grifts, because it's a way that government funds that's normally paid for the welfare of the public are taken and given to private entities. So pretty much they're just money changers, because they don't really do anything really. They just figured out a way to get money out of doing what the public has and the government is already doing.
Yeah, and cycle and recycle it back to the politicians that they own. I mean, that's the grift, is that somebody comes along and figures out a way to do something that the government is doing, only make it profitable, right? Whether it's charter schools or whether it's utilities, privatizing utilities, water, electric, sewage, things like that, privatizing roads, toll roads, things like that. They'll figure out something, or Medicare, privatize Medicare. They'll figure out a way that they can make some money off it, and then they'll go out and find a bunch of politicians and basically pay them off to promote this. And that's exactly what happened with Medicare Advantage. That's exactly what happened with Medicare Part D, and Medicare can't negotiate drug prices. And that's very much what is going on right now with charter schools. So you nailed it, Dan. You absolutely nailed it. So, I think the solution to this is for us to all realize that what you're saying is absolutely true. It's a giant grift. Danny, thank you. It's just an ongoing, forever running giant grift. We'll be back. We're going to check in. Oh, I got to tell you, this story at Hanford is absolutely, well, maybe because I live downriver from there, it's a little disconcerting. But we'll get into this in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's million families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Growing nuclear risk in the Northwest is the headline. Hanford nuclear sites contamination is getting downright spooky. On the line with us is Thom Carpenter. He's the executive director of Hanford Challenge. HanfordChallenge.org is the website. The Twitter handle is Hanford, HANFORDC, the letter C. Thom, welcome to the program. Tell us what's going on. First of all, for people who may not be familiar with this, what exactly are we referring to when we refer to Hanford?
Okay, well, the Hanford site is a former Cold War facility that made plutonium for nuclear bombs. It started in World War II and ran for 45 years with 9 nuclear reactors. And it took the radioactive fuel, separated that out, and made a big mess in the process. And so for the last 30 years, it's been in a cleanup mode. It's the worst contaminated facility in the Western Hemisphere. The inventories of nuclear waste there are just immense. And so this is a big problem for the United States to pay for this cleanup or to even accomplish the cleanup, because we don't have anything like it. It's never happened before like this. And so there are a lot of technical and managerial and actually corruption challenges going on.
I'm concerned about the contamination challenges, about the possibility that those of us who live within a few hundred miles of Hanford, or even downwind from Hanford, which is pretty much the rest of the United States, depending on the prevailing winds, might be exposed to something quite dangerous. Is there so much radioactive material there that either A, it could start fissioning and produce something like we saw at Chernobyl, or B, that it could simply provoke more unintended releases, like we saw with 3 Mile Island or whatnot? I mean, how severe is the situation? What kind of analogy could you draw? This is not Fukushima, is it?
No, it's not the same as reactors, but the contamination issues. So Hanford has all these buildings and areas where there's a lot of contamination. We refer to that as high-level nuclear waste. And some of the terms for these radionuclides might be familiar to listeners, like cesium-137 and strontium-90. These are highly radioactive materials that don't belong in our food supply, don't belong in our water, or certainly in the soil or the river. But that's exactly the risk that we are worried about. So for instance, there's a building out there that holds some 56 million curies of radioactivity. And a curie is a unit of measurement of radiation. And if you've heard of Chernobyl, that put out about 2.5 million curies of cesium-137. And Fukushima put out 9 million curies. Well, this is 56 million. These pools in this building, I mean, this was built in 1970. It wasn't designed to last as long as they've been using it. There's earthquake faults out there with a bigger punch than they thought it could deliver when they designed this. And so there's a real concern that the concrete in these pools has failed and that they need to get this stuff out, because if you were to lose a bit of the cooling water, then you could, and lose maybe 10% to the air of the cesium and strontium-90, then that would be on par with what happened at Fukushima and Chernobyl. That's just one facility. There are underground nuclear waste tanks. There's a bunch of stuff just in the soil that is connected to the river. But the big thing to worry about is, in the short term, a risk from explosions or fires and this stuff going airborne. In the long term, for future generations, is that the slow motion fallout of this stuff seeping into the river and permanently contaminating the river, the crops, the fish, the animals, and eventually the humans that live nearby.
I think everybody knows that there is a cancer risk associated with radiation. In addition to, if there's high levels of radiation, radiation poisoning risk. But cesium, the body thinks the cesium is potassium. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. The body thinks the cesium is potassium, so radioactive cesium gets absorbed into the body and embeds into our muscles, and high levels of radioactive cesium, or even not even high levels, even moderate levels, can accumulate in the heart, one of the most active muscles in the body, and literally burn holes through it. It's called a condition called cesium heart, where the heart eventually fails because it's got holes burned in it by the cesium. And strontium, the body thinks is calcium or phosphorus, one or the other. You tell me, and puts it into our bones, where it causes bone cancer. Do I have that right?
No, that's right. Strontium-90 acts like calcium and goes to the bone. And cesium-137 is, the body recognizes that as potassium. So both are useful for living organisms. And they, instead of helping you, however, they irradiate, the cells and destroy DNA or injure DNA in the cells. That's the blueprint for, how, our bodies are. So, the fact that we have, healthy bodies is really dependent on having healthy DNA and healthy cells. So this is a long-term tragedy or ticking time bomb if this stuff were to get out into the environment.
Yeah, when I moved to Germany in May of 1986, literally a week after, in fact, I flew in on my birthday, May 7th, and that was about a week after Chernobyl blew up, as I recall. It was raining that day when I arrived in Frankfurt, and the city was evacuated. There was nobody on the streets. I got into the hotel, and they took my coat and sent it off to the cleaners because he said, your coat is now covered with radioactive material. I mean, the cloud from Chernobyl was passing over. It was grim, and we lived there for a year. And I used to walk around with a Geiger counter and find hot spots in the forest. You could make the Geiger counter trip off in the supermarket. There were certain foods, particularly the mushrooms. It would just go nuts. And the milk they kept raising the level of whatever it was in the milk, presumably cesium, because it was passing through the cows. It went from 1 becquerel per liter to 10 to 50 to, I think they ended up at 500 becquerels per liter as being the legal limit. Is that the sort of thing that we could anticipate here if this were to go south? And to this point, I mean, you said this has been going on at Hanford since the 50s. How much radiation has already escaped into the environment around Hanford?
Oh, just huge amounts into the river, into the air. It's caused downwinders to get cancer. These are farmers mostly and people who live nearby the site. There have been lawsuits about that. The people who are really at most risk are the workers at the site, even the workers, past workers, but also current workers doing the cleanup. And they're getting big exposures to chemical vapors, to radiation, and their cancer rates are off the charts. And as a result, the government recognizes this and has a compensation program in place. And I should mention that the state of Washington, a couple of years ago in 2018, passed a law that reformed our worker compensation law that gave Hanford workers a leg up. If you can imagine, it's hard to prove that their chemicals or their radiation caused your cancer, just like with cigarettes.
Right.
It's like, prove that my Camel cigarette caused your lung cancer. Well, Hanford's radiation and Hanford's chemicals also cause cancers and other heart disease and neurological disease. So given that the state legislature reformed the law here in the state of Washington to say you don't have to show that causation. If you have that disease and you worked with these materials at the Hanford site, you're in. You get compensation and medical care.
That's great. That's like what they did with asbestos.
Right. And the federal government appealed that decision under Trump, right? And lost in the federal court, lost in the Ninth Circuit, but to our astonishment, the Biden administration appealed that to the Supreme Court. So, the state apparatus, the governor, the attorney general, to the Senate, have all protested, obviously, as have we. And so we're asking listeners and viewers today to go to our website and take action to send a message to Joe Biden saying, drop this Supreme Court appeal and give justice to these workers.
That's Hanford Challenge, HANFORD, challenge.org is the website. We're talking to Thom Carpenter, the executive director. So is that the principal call for action right now? I'm assuming that the federal government actually is on this issue of trying to clean up Hanford?
Yeah, what they're really onto is trying to find shortcuts. So they're trying to relabel the high-level waste in these tanks, which is a term of art. High-level waste is in the law. And they're trying to redefine it. And it looks like, cross out the words high level and put the words low level on it so that they don't have to then, vitrify the waste, meaning put it in the glass and put that into a deep geological repository.
Right,
so
which is
again,
expensive.
I'll go back to, what I said earlier, which is this is the largest repository of high-level waste in the United States and in this part of the world. And it's expensive and it's complicated. To say that it's not high-level waste flies in the face of science, and we are fighting that, as is the state of Washington. The Attorney General here is Bob Ferguson. He's fantastic. He's with us on this. We wrote a letter to the Biden administration. That is another action alert saying stop the relabeling.
Right.
Just deal with this.
What's the river that runs by Hanford, and where does that water end up? I'm assuming it ends up in the Columbia?
It's, the river is the Columbia.
Oh.
They built the Hanford site on the Columbia River. That's where all of the reactors were located. And that is the toilet that Hanford has been dumping into since its inception in 1945.
Wow.
And continues to be so now. There are still, some streams of radiation and cancer and chemicals going into that, but much, much less than there used to be.
So even now there's radiation leaking from Hanford into the Columbia River as we speak?
Absolutely. Yeah. And not alarming amounts,
Right.
don't
freak out.
Portland.
Yeah.
But
get active. I get it. HanfordChallenge.org is the website. Hanford C on Twitter. Thom Carpenter is the executive director. Tom, thanks a lot for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. We'll be right back with more of the news and news of the day and your calls and issues and thoughts and crazy alerts and everything else. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Michael in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. Thanks for fighting the good fight. And there's since the murder rates went up last year, a lot of Republicans were doing that usual, Democrats are soft on crime baloney. There's one thing that the left has never really brought up, and that's crime really is the only reason why crime is as bad as it is because of the war on drugs. We all acknowledge prohibition was a failure. It did nothing but empower the mafia and various gangs. And alcohol is not even that addictive. And now, because of the war on drugs, various organized criminals have a monopoly on these very addictive drugs. And it's, financially empowering them. It's giving them a lot of revenue to buy weapons and all kinds of stuff. So
yeah, I'm with you. I mean, this is why we decriminalized pot, and it's why the state of Oregon has decriminalized all drugs, right? All drugs, and it doesn't mean you can sell them, but you can't you don't go to jail anymore for possessing them. And this is really a medical problem, not a legal problem, or it should be a medical problem. Portugal decriminalized all drugs almost 20 years ago, and it broke the back of organized crime. It reduced the level of drug use. I mean, you're always going to have a certain percentage of people who are going to go over the edge, and it's a small percentage, 1%, 2%, 3% of the population who get addicted to substances outside the mainstream, outside of caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. Those, you can't, we tried for 40 years. We tried to stop that, well, arguably for 90 years. We tried to stop that with laws and with jails and prisons, and all we did was destroy a lot of people's lives, even worse than the drugs would have destroyed them. And, and frankly, I think the biggest problem we've got with drug pushers in this country are people like the Sackler family, pushing legal drugs. But I'm with you, Michael. I hear you, and I am with you. Thank you for the call. Kevin, listening on Progressive Voices in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, I was listening to your segment with the lady we were talking about,
Jennifer, yeah,
education. And my thing is, I'm a black parent, and I just want us to make it clear when they talk about parents, they're not really talking about black parents or Latino parents or even LGBTQ parents. I would love to have children learn about the history of racism in school, for example, but I mean, they're not interested in that. So, I just want people to be clear who they're talking about when they say parents, because I don't think they're representing me or, indigenous parents or anybody like that.
Yeah.
So
I don't think they're representing the majority of parents. The majority of Americans want a strong public school system. The problem is, because we fund public schools with property taxes, and I got a note from somebody telling me that in Pennsylvania, 60% of education is paid for with local property taxes. And because we do this, and this is very intentional in the 1890s through the 1920s when these laws were put into place all across the country, it was very intentional to keep poor communities having crappy schools and allow, which are largely communities of color, and allow wealthy white communities to have really good public schools. I mean, that's why it's the way it is. I'm completely with you, Kevin. Kevin, thank you very much for the call. It's spot on. And we'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com, and it's about 18 U.S. Code 2384, which is a law that was published back in put on the books on June 25th, 1948. It was updated in 1956. And it's very, very straightforward. It says, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. Tell me that doesn't perfectly describe what happened on January 6th. Seditious conspiracy. The video's at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Back, Thom Hartmann here with you and Regina in Chicago. Hey, Regina, what's up?
With new computers in
Hello?
every room.
Hey, Regina, you're on the air.
Oh,
I was having a philosophical debate with my brother.
Okay. Tell him I said hi. So what's on your mind?
What you were talking about earlier, I'd just like to share with your listeners that privatization is theft of public funds. That's it.
I agree.
It's an outright theft. Now, and when you look up the word grift in the dictionary, it's an engagement or engaging in petty swindling. And all of the thievery that we see going on, I think we have bumped out of that realm. It's not petty. Okay. Okay. And then when you look at theft, that's an action or a crime of stealing. But of course, to the Republicans, oh no, we're not. We're going to provide you with a better product. You know, they would never admit to it being an action of actually stealing money. And that's what my brother now, he just reminded me, we always come to your events when you're here, you know.
Oh, thank you.
When you used to come here.
Yeah.
If you'll ever come here again. We miss you here in Chicago. But anyway.
Thank you, Regina. Yeah, hopefully we'll be back.
But you know, when the lottery, they snowed us all here in Illinois. They might have done it in other states, but I remember them talking about when they started the lottery. Oh, the lottery is going to be this, and vote to have this done. Help the schools, and that it was going to be equally distributed amongst all the counties in the state of Illinois, whereas most of the money came out of the county of Cook County, where Chicago is. And if you really break it down, the elusive happiness goal, you know, everybody has the opportunity to play the lottery, but mostly it's in the poor neighborhood. You know,
sure.
The dream.
So did the school money that the lottery is supposed to produce in Illinois not end up back in the communities that were producing most of the revenue for it, like Chicago?
I would think not, because when you look at some of the downstate Illinois schools, you got these huge schools, you know, just with everything to be an advantage, brand new computers, and then when you come back into the poorer neighborhoods, especially in Cook County, you don't see the equal disbursement.
Yeah. I've seen that all over the country. I certainly see it where my brothers live back in Michigan. Regina, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I got to run.
Let's talk about theft of public.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Regina nails it. Privatization is the theft of public funds for private gain. We'll be back. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglas. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglas in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and James in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, James, what's on your mind? James?
I'm here.
Hey, there you are. Thank you. Happy Indigenous People Day. Back at you. You know, for the 18 years that I've been doing this show, every Columbus Day, I would read my rant from Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight about how Columbus tortured people and murdered people and raped people and sold young girls into slavery and all this kind of stuff. And this year, we reached out to a few Native American groups that we've had on the program in the past to see if they might be available to do a hit. None of them were. But this year I'm not reading that because I'm just not even, I mean, I guess I'm talking about Columbus right now, but my intention was to ignore Columbus and just focus on Indigenous people and what a marvelous thing it is and this wonderful speech that Joe Biden gave. But is that what you called about?
Well, not really. I just wanted to wish that to you and say that the progress you're working towards does show measurable results once in a while. No, what I wanted to talk about was, I mean, I hear you. I agree with 99% of what you say, and we know it's true. But unfortunately, what percentage of the population is listening, Tom?
Well, I'm not sure what the it is that you're referring to that is true and with which you agree.
The fact that they've always been grifters. You were talking about, I had unparalleled access to wealthy people and a lot of national leaders during the 80s because I worked for a certain car service. And whenever I could, I would get a question in or try to get them to talk to me about, and there was a certain lady on Wall Street that wanted to privatize Social Security, and this was in the middle 80s.
Sure.
And I don't think it was a new idea then.
No, Reagan talked about it. And George W. Bush campaigned on it. He traveled all around the country in 2005. He gave 20 speeches pitching the idea of privatizing Social Security. Every speech he gave, it got less popular, so he finally gave up. But it's been around for a while. Yeah, I think you called me a year or so ago about this, James, and told me a story, unless I'm thinking of somebody else who was also driving for one of these high-end car companies. So your question, how many people are actually listening? I think it's a lot. You will recall that when Donald Trump was running for president in 2016, he said he was going to raise taxes on the rich. People loved him for that. I mean, I think that a lot of people, I know people who voted for him because he said he was going to do that. He said he was going to expand Medicare and Social Security. People loved him for that. He said he was going to expand the social safety net. And he said that the system is rigged by rich people and big corporations, and he was going to break that. He was going to drain that swamp. He used to have rallies where he'd have people chanting, "Drain the swamp, drain the swamp." And then who does he put in charge of the Commerce Department? Wilbur Ross, who Forbes magazine said may well be the biggest grifter in the history of America.
Good old Wilbur.
Yeah, good old Wilbur.
But, no, the point I need to make, I'm looking at these terrible polls that are out, and everyone's, the Democrats can't govern, they aren't passing any legislation. I'm afraid they just need to get through what they can. Whatever they can get Joe Manchin, and they should bribe some of these independents, because that is the currency of Congress and the reality of the Senate especially, and just get some stuff passed.
I suspect it's going to end up there in all probability, which doesn't make me happy at all, and I don't think it's going to help the Democrats in 2022 or 2024, but we'll see. We'll see. I would like, the alternative, of course, is to just, shove this down the throats of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and there's probably a half a dozen other Democrats who don't want to blow up the filibuster by ending the filibuster and then putting some real legislation in place that's going to do something serious. James, thank you for the call. Ralph in Rome, New York. Hey, Ralph, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks for putting me on. When I was listening to you and the woman about charter schools,
Jennifer,
I felt like, thank you. I felt like you and she were arguing about where the deck chairs on the Titanic ought to go. The problem with funding schools is that you haven't properly funded the first 5 years. Children's development from 0 to 5 is probably more important than what you do for the next 12 years after that.
Yeah, that's exactly why in the Build Back Better program, Joe Biden's Build Back Better program, that is only being opposed by Manchin and Sinema right now, there is basically free pre-K, for the ages 3 to 5 anyway, for pretty much everybody in the United States. I mean, it's a very smart thing to be doing. And by the way, it's something that most other developed democracies did long ago.
Amen. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
Much more important than what we had discussing earlier, because neither you nor she is going to make a big difference from 5 to 15.
Yeah,
Have a great day.
I thank you, Ralph. Yeah, when we lived in Germany in 86 and 87, our youngest was 5, 6 years old, maybe 4. She was young in any case, and they had free public preschools. I mean, it was like, yeah, sure. Joe in Loxahatchee, Florida. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. You were talking about the nuclear power plants just a little while ago.
Yeah.
And it jogged me where about 3 months ago, I researched Turkey Point nuclear power plant south of Miami. Mm-hmm. And you can research this online yourself. There's a minor, small newspaper that carried the story where there was an incident at the plant where I'm a retired marine engineer, chief engineer on the steamboats. Mm-hmm. And they had dug 10 miles of canals to put in cooling lines for possibly the air ejectors, which get rid of the breakdown of the air and hydrogen and oxygen from the water. And apparently, in my estimation, a safety valve blew and put in high-pressure irradiated steam into the pipeline, and they had to dump something like 30 tons of salt on top of those pipes to not contaminate the air around the place.
Whoa.
Yeah, and there's pictures in there of
this was radioactive hydrogen, tritium.
I don't know what they're using down in there.
No. Well, that's what's produced when water gets broken up by radiation, and you get just a wild. I don't know if it's a proton or what it is, but it's tritium. Anyway, back to you, Joe. I'm out of my depth here.
Anyway, there's pictures of salt suds about a foot high around a nuclear power plant, and it goes into Biscayne Bay and contaminates Biscayne Bay going up to Miami.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, everybody's like, over the weekend on one of the shows, I think it was on Fareed Zakaria's show, oh, yeah, nuclear, there's no waste, there's no carbon, which that's not true. I mean, there's an enormous amount of carbon in mining uranium, in transporting uranium, in refining uranium, in getting it into the plants. There's an enormous amount of carbon in making the concrete for the plants, making the steel for the plants, building the plants, maintaining the plants. Nuclear power plants are not carbon-free, and they produce massive amounts of radioactive waste, and, we've got no way to deal with this radioactive waste. So, yeah, Joe, thank you. Amy in Carlton, Oregon. Hey, Amy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, about the debt limit and how we talk about it. Say you go out with your credit card and you purchase a service that is billed monthly. At the time that you purchase it, you have available credit for $2,000, but the service over the term of the contract is $10,000. When you reach the contract or your credit limit, you still owe $8,000 on that service that you have to pay because you signed a contract. So you have to get your credit limit increase to cover that.
That's a good metaphor or analogy.
That's the way we need to talk about it.
Yeah. It's. I think I get it. I agree with you, Amy. I think though that the strategy that the Democrats have come upon, and I think it's probably a good one, is to say all we're trying to do is pay off the debts of the previous years. And in this case, Donald Trump's $8 trillion in debt that he ran up in 4 years.
We're paying the contract that was signed during the Trump administration that didn't have enough credit available for the contract they signed.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Thank you very much for that. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was about 6 or 8 years ago, before we had Governor Whitmer, I called and tried to find out what was happening to the Michigan lottery money because they kept saying it was going to the schools, yet our taxes were constantly being challenged and voted on for school. And so I called, and somebody called me back, I can't remember who, and they said, well, what happens with the Michigan lottery money is it goes into the school fund, but it doesn't change the funding to the schools because we just use that money to fund the schools, and then we can use the other money in other things. So when we're paying money for taxes for our schools and we think we're paying for schools, they're funding that account with lottery money, but it's not really an advantage. They're taking what we would pay in and using it on other things.
Oh, that's weird. So your property taxes are going for to pay, to expand the fire department or something, or
yeah, it's going
whatever.
for something else, and we have no idea what. They just said it gives us an opportunity to use the tax money elsewhere, which is totally. The schools have not benefited.
In Norway, when you pay your taxes every year, first of all, you don't have to calculate your taxes. The government does that for you, and they send you basically a receipt. Your tax form. And not only does it break out all your income and how much it was taxed and what your total tax was that you paid, because they do withholding just like we do here, but it also summarizes where your tax dollars went. So it would say, you spent $1,600 in taxes this year. You paid $1,600 in taxes this year. $130 of it went to the schools. $310 of it went to our defense systems. $425, whatever. It's all broken out. And we could do that here in the United States, and it would not be that expensive. The industry that is fighting this is the tax preparation industry. They don't want the IRS going near anything that has to do with something that they can monetize. And it's real unfortunate because I think you're absolutely right. I think if people knew where their tax dollars were going and how they were being spent, that
it would give people more power because knowledge is power.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we need to get back to William Proxmire's Golden Fleece Awards. Denise, thank you for the calls. For those of you who are younger than I am, back in the day, Proxmire, who I believe was the Democratic senator from Wisconsin, used to give an award every year to the worst, typically defense contractor.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Whoever had fleeced the government the worst. And as I recall, it was Proxmire who outed the $10,000 toilet seats. We'll be right back. And welcome back. And let's see here, Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's up?
I want to know why we keep celebrating Columbus Day when he's not the founder of the country. Why we keep celebrating this day?
Well, I think we've by and large stopped celebrating it. It's now Indigenous Peoples Day rather than Columbus Day. Although, in many states it's still called Columbus Day, and it's going to take a while for that to change. But you're right. Columbus did not discover this continent even. I mean, the Vikings were here 500 years before Columbus, and Native Americans were here 20,000 years before Columbus. So yes. I mean, how do you discover a country that's already occupied? I don't get it.
Same here.
Yeah. Well said, Johan. Hopefully we'll move through this. Excuse me, Glenda. In Dundee, Oregon. Hey, Glenda, what's on your mind today? Pardon my sneeze.
No problem.
It's cold in here.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. What's up? What's on your mind?
I wanted to add to the conversation that you had with Jennifer Stefano.
Uh-huh.
I'm a former preschool teacher, spent 30 years doing that. And the one thing that I want to point out is that a lot of these voucher schools are also nonprofit schools. So they're not adding to the commons of the roads or the commons that are being used by everybody because they're not paying taxes on it.
Oh, excellent point. Yeah. And and there's this new kind of standard for nonprofits that, I think probably Libby Dole back in the 1980s or 1990s, whenever Bob Dole, her senator husband, was running for president, she was president of the Red Cross. And there was quite a scandal around the fact that they paid her $700,000 a year, and it was a nonprofit organization. And as I recall, I might have that number wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. It's been a lot of years, though. And now you've got nonprofits. I mean, there's nonprofit hospitals that are paying people $10, $15 million a year. You've got nonprofits all over the country that are paying obscene amounts of money. It's still a scam. They can still run a scam, but it's just, instead of distributing the money to the stockholders, they distribute the money to the executives. It's, but it's right. And to the politicians who make it possible, right?
Right. I mean, that way they can continue their nonprofit status without, actually contributing.
Yeah, and I think, but I think the larger issue, and the one that I brought up with Jennifer, was that with a publicly owned school, I am the public. You are the public, Glenda. We can literally show up at our local school board meeting and make our opinions known, or for that matter, we can run for school board and we can end up running the school. Whereas when it's a private school, whether it's a private corporate for-profit or whether it's a nonprofit, we have no say in it other than, yes, I want to send my kid there or not, or maybe I can go in and beg them to please teach civics or something. But they're not answerable to we the people, and they're taking our tax dollars. I'm with you. Glenda, thank you very much for the call. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's great to hear from you. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we dare to say, is Facebook a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. Come on. This corporate personhood stuff has gone way too far. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Mark in Charlotte, Michigan. Hey, Mark. It's been a long time since I've been in Charlotte, but used to drive through that town a lot. What's up?
Well, actually, it's Charlotte. We're from the north. So
yeah, you're right. It is Charlotte.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Where in Michigan is Charlotte?
It's just south of Lansing. They're about 20 miles.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. My apologies. I've been away from the state for too long. It's been 50 years.
That's all right. Hey, I was just going to comment on the interview you had with Jennifer and how she so despises the teacher unions that she just as soon eliminate the unions so that you basically can pay these teachers whatever minimum wage. But yet, if you were to ask a Republican about trying to disband
Mark, you just vanished.
Arms.
Oh, there you're back. Okay. If you were to ask a Republican about what?
to disband a police union, they would be so up in arms.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
yeah,
because they protect those, but yet they won't protect the teacher. And it's like I was telling your screener, I said, I've never heard of a teacher shooting an unarmed student, you know, and yet the unions are just the worst things to ever hit. And I'm thinking, man, you guys got your priorities in the wrong spot. You know, if you want to disband anything, let's the public service people are holding communities hostage, so to speak, you know? So,
no, I totally get
anyways,
it. Mark, thank you.
I just, you're
Spot
welcome,
on. Spot
Tom.
on.
And,
police unions, I'm with you. Thank you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I just wanted to bring up something. It took me a while to figure it out because I'm so slow. But every time I talk to a Republican or a Democrat, and I am criticizing Trump, they always bring it back to George Bush. So I just want to make something clear. I was in the George Bush administration, all right? I was on active duty at the time, and I was much younger. And the thing is I'm only looking at the Trump administration from the outside. But check this out. Bush approached executive power and the law. His administration approached it in a way that said, does it explicitly say the president can't do a thing? And if it doesn't explicitly say it, then George Bush would do it, and his administration would do it.
Right.
Donald Trump does not use, and his administration did not use that calculus. They don't care if it explicitly says a president can't do it or not. They just do it. And this is what scares me. I mean, Donald Trump, if he has his hands on the arsenal of democracy, that doesn't really scare me. A Trump administration with their grip on the arsenal of democracy scares me to death. And I also just wanted to add that Friday, you told a caller that you don't believe that the UN observation of our next elections was tenable, was something that was doable. I can just tell you, because I'm only going to bring this up to you, Tom, because you said you're a peace activist. That is the only way these transitions of power in the United States are going to go down peacefully from here on out. And I got you. You're not
fear
wrong.
you're right. I fear you're right, Dave. The problem is you got states that have outlawed the UN overseeing elections in their states. I mean, this was a hot button thing on Fox News a couple of years ago, and you had states who actually passed legislation about that. We had this national conversation about the UN a while ago. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We're going to be back with Jen Senko, a fascinating deep dive, conversations with great minds into the brainwashing of my dad. Stick around. I think you're going to find this interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for newsreaders. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann. Transistor radio, in the other hand.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us for our Conversations with Great Minds Deep Dive Hour here is Jen Senko. Jen was first on this program years ago when the documentary The Brainwashing of My Dad came out. It's still available. Jen can tell us in just a moment where you can find it. But she now has a book out by the same title, based on the award-winning documentary, the Brainwashing of My Dad, and then the subtitle, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back. Jen, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Tom. It's great to be back with you.
Thank you. So I want to get into your dad's story. I mean, that's kind of the spine of the book. But before we do, in the book, you start out actually with the backstory, even before your dad was certainly before your dad started watching Fox News. In Chapter 1, the Great Depression, the New Deal, and the Nazi propaganda that paved the way for extreme right-wing media. Can you explain this to us? We've got a lot of elbow room here. We've got a whole hour. We can dive into some detail.
Yeah.
What are you talking about here?
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say we're sunk unless we can fix or fight the media, Tom. It has a very powerful, almost magical effect on all of us. It's how we get our information about what's going on in our world, but not only that, it does shape who we are and what we believe more than we like to think it does. So I went back to FDR. He was one of the only ones that was paying attention to the propaganda that was going on in Germany before World War II. And he noticed the incredible effect it was having on the German people. And he thought, well, if this is what happens when you have one-sided media, one-sided radio, especially because there was radio back then.
I have a clip. Can I interrupt with a clip?
Oh, you bet.
This is FDR talking about exactly what you're talking about. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt as President of the United States.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
There you go.
If we only had someone that courageous now who can actually just tell the truth about it. But I think that right-wing media has everybody kind of like shell-shocked and, on the defensive and almost like abused spouses. You know, people are so afraid to bring up like the fairness doctrine, like that's a bad word, or talk about any kind of fairness going on in the media. So.
Or even look at what Canada banned Fox News.
Yeah.
They just said, we don't want, that's poison, we don't want it here.
Yeah, it's very dangerous, Fox News, for many, many reasons. I mean, people talk about social media and all that, but Fox News is the seedbed of a lot of this. A lot of this emanates from Fox.
So back to the 1930s. I'm sorry, I derailed you there.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyway, I think that's where a lot of things started with FDR. First of all, he had the foresight to see how powerful media could be, and was alarmed by it, and so came up with the Radio Act of, I think it was 1929, and then, created later on all these rules for ownership, and that there had to be, and in the Fairness Doctrine, there had to be diverse opinions. So he had a lot of foresight, and his other thing, the New Deal, is sort of when the wealthy kind of got up on their heels and thought, oh no, we're going to have to pay more taxes. So he started a lot.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And these techniques, as you talk about, the genuinely paved the way. So you're for right-wing media. I'm sorry.
Right. The tactics, a lot of the tactics, that was so funny as I was researching what a lot of the Nazi tactics were. I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's what right-wing media does. And I'm sure that Roger Ailes delved into it, and many learned from it. Why not? I mean, they were smart and they knew what they wanted to do, so they wanted to learn from the best, quote unquote.
Right, and even in the 30s, this was not a new idea. I mean, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince back in, the 1530s or something like that. I mean, it was a long time ago. So from there you go to, that's your first chapter. From there you go to The Right is Declared Dead. What are you talking about here in your chapter 2?
Oh, okay. So I'll just do like a little bit of real quick history before that. I mean, the right was really pissed off after, I hope I can say that on your radio show. That's fine. After FDR had the New Deal, and it saved the Depression, and there was a middle class that was growing, and then Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954, and this guy, Buchanan, I can't
James
remember
Buchanan.
his first name right. Yeah, he got very upset about it because he didn't want to be paying taxes for everybody to go to school, especially black kids, but it kind of started him on this quest to turn back the clock in a way, and he enlisted the help of Koch, the father Koch, and they kind of, were researching and thinking, what can we do? And then later on, the Birch Society was created, and at the time, I grew up in the 60s, so I remember the Birch Society, and everybody thought, oh my gosh, these people are so kooky. But it is exactly kind of like what's happening now and the thoughts that are being held by the right. But anyway, so Goldwater actually ran on the Birch's platform. And so because they were just considered kooky, and they were for small government, like no government pretty much, and everybody was a communist, even General Eisenhower. They were like McCarthy plus. So when Goldwater ran on that platform, he just got slaughtered by Johnson. And at that time, also, there were movements afoot that were going on that were trying to break free from, like, restrictive social mores and equal rights for everybody. You know, there was a burgeoning middle class. And then there were these shows on, like Rowan and Martin, and, you know, it just seemed it was in to be liberal. And so the right was declared dead by pundits. And so that's when they started to really organize and say, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, number one, since the media, like people like Walter Cronkite, tell the truth, that doesn't look that good for us. Like, so we better start painting the media as liberal. So they created an organization called AIM, A-I-M, and to...
It was Accuracy in Media, wasn't it?
Right. And
this was Lee Atwater's famous, we need to work the refs, the referees being the media.
Yeah, that's right. And so that was like the beginning of it. That was their goal. And they even got on boards, broadcast corporation boards to influence them. And they would really, this is when the screaming started, like, it was a coordinated attack to anybody that had anything liberal on and didn't have anything conservative on, they would attack them. Okay, and so they kind of like built that up. And that happened there, but I could go on.
Yeah, well, you know, feel free to wrap that up if you want, and then we'll hit a break
Yeah, oh, okay. Well, that parlayed next into, I was going to talk about Roger Ailes. And, you know, Roger Ailes, everybody, all these pundits, this is what people get wrong about Fox. A lot of people in the media think that Fox only got bad and extreme after 9/11, or that maybe it leaned a little conservative. Sure, it didn't start out as extreme as it got. It gradually got more and more extreme as simultaneously, and not coincidentally, the Republican Party got more extreme. But for those that don't know or forget, Rupert Murdoch hired Roger Ailes to create Fox, and they both had an agenda. Roger Ailes wanted a TV station that would make the GOP look good.
Yeah, he'd pitched it to Nixon.
That's right. It was a secret memo that was unearthed in the annals of the Nixon Library. And it actually outlined a clear strategy for creating a TV news station that would promote a GOP agenda. It was even called a plan for putting the GOP on TV news. Right. So the plan laid out how it could use biased media to create GOP viewers and thus GOP voters. It wasn't planned to serve the GOP, you know, like people who already were. And it was planned to convert viewers. And it stated it was going to be easy peasy because it stated people are lazy, they want their thinking done for them.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. In fact, he referred to it as GOP TV in the memo. We're talking with Jan Senko. She is the director, writer, producer of The Brainwashing of My Dad, the documentary, and media activist. TheBrainwashingOfMyDad.com is the website. She has a new book out of the same title. Jen, where can people find the documentary real quick?
They should go to the website, TheBrainwashingOfMyDad.com, and then look at streaming, and there's a bunch of places. Program.
Okay, great. So you've got links to where you can find it there at TheBrainwashingOfMyDad.com with a THC, The Brainwashing. We'll be right back with Jan Senko. And welcome back. We're talking with Jan Senko in our Conversations with the Great Minds here. This is about her book, The Brainwashing of My Dad. So Ailes gets hired. There's a fascinating op-ed. I don't know if you're familiar with it, that was written by Kevin Rudd, who was the Prime Minister of Australia back 15 years ago or thereabouts. And it's titled Rupert Murdoch, and it was in the Sydney Morning Herald, which is kind of their New York Times. And it was titled, Rupert Murdoch is the Cancer That is Destroying Australian Democracy. And in that, he lays out how Murdoch basically, rewrote politics in Australia by ending up owning more than half of all the newspapers by circulation in the country, and then, picking up media channels as well. And then he went on to the United Kingdom, and he did the same thing there, and then he came to the United States, and he's doing the same thing here.
Right.
So you've got Roger Ailes being hired by Rupert Murdoch. Who's driving the cart here?
Well, I think that they were like a perfect a match made in hell. They kind of like coincided. I mean, Rupert Murdoch, to me, he wanted control. He's a major control freak, and he wants things to. You're right. What happened is when he bought all these newspapers, he realized that he could get in a politician that he liked and then get them out when he was, done with them. So that's why he started doing this, almost all over the world, in New Zealand and England, and then came here, and Reagan made him a citizen. Thank you very much, Mr. Reagan, in 1985, so that he could buy more media. And this was as media rules, media ownership rules were, gradually like loosening up.
Right.
So, then he just expanded his empire even more, especially after the Telecommunications Reform Act in 1996. But that's jumping ahead. The other thing you asked that was driving, I think when you asked what was driving this, are you referring to just between Limbaugh and Murdoch?
Between Ailes and Murdoch. Ailes was famously
that's what
paranoid.
I meant.
He was. His house was like barricaded. I mean, at least according to the documentary on him I saw, Citizen Ailes, I think it was. He was a little nutty. And Murdoch is more of just, from everything I've been able to read, just your old-fashioned right-wing billionaire who thinks of himself as the master of the universe, the guy who's smarter than everybody else, and everybody just needs to think like me.
I think you're right,
So
he even one time said that, dictatorship probably wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah. So do you think that Murdoch was motivated more by a desire to make money on this right-wing shtick? Or
No.
that, or the ideology itself?
I think he wanted to do both.
Yeah.
I think he wanted control. And that's another thing that people get wrong, is that they think that Fox is just doing this to make money. But they figured out how they could actually get people hooked. Roger Ailes was a genius that way by introducing anger and emotion into these newscasts. You'd never seen emotion and all that in newscasts before. It was Walter Cronkite who was, just...
Nice, boring news. Yeah. Jen Senko is with us, The Brainwashing of My Dad. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at ThomHartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished, and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House, versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at ThomHartmann.com. Talking with Jen Senko about her book, The Brainwashing of My Dad. So So now we have in place this right-wing media machine, Fox News, with Roger Ailes, running it, designing it to be as addictive as possible, with lots and lots of emotion, and particularly addictive for older men, because you've got a lot of, the bimbo blonde kind of stereotype thing just really came into full blossom with Fox News. And go ahead.
Yeah, there was another reason why it appealed to older white men. It wasn't just because he had those leggy blondes who were required to wear short skirts. That was one, I'm sure that was one big motivating reason. But also, white men at that time, with all of the social movements that had been going on since the 70s, I mean, they were dying down, but they kind of felt like they were being phased out. They would have to reinvent themselves. They were angry. They knew that the system was rigged, but they didn't know how, and they didn't know who to blame. So here you have the guilty party to blame, telling them, hey, I know why you're so mad. It's Democrats. Everything fell under the umbrella of Democrats, like whether it was race or culture, anything that smacked of being liberal, that was demonized. And so that's what they latched onto. They were angry, and so there was a port for them to dock their ship in.
Yeah, I remember in the 50s and 60s, the argument, my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting when I was like 12 or 13.
Wow.
The argument was black people are coming for your jobs. By the 70s, as the women's movement was happening, it was white people, women are coming for your job. And,
right.
And then, of course, you've got all this social ferment as we go into the 80s, and Ailes is starting Fox News, and then they're both coming for your job. So
then it's what?
Then they're both coming for your job. It's the black people, right. is the women, and then of course Trump kicked off his campaign with the Mexicans are coming for your job. Oh my God, and the Muslims want to come blow up your buildings, and so let's all get hysterical here together and be totally freaked out.
And the Democrats are letting in all the immigrants in order to replace you white folk.
Exactly. So we're talking with Jen Senko. The book is The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed Father and Divided Our Nation, and how we can fight back. I want to get into the story of your dad specifically, Jen, on the other side of the break. We'll continue our conversation in about 6 minutes. Stick around. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The website is thebrainwashingofmydad.com, and on Twitter, Jen_Senko, S-E-N-K-O. So our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettled by Ryan Hampton. The subtitle is How the Purdue Pharma Bankruptcy Failed the Victims of the American Overdose Crisis. And this is from the introduction. August 17th, 2018. Thick thunderclouds darkened the horizon, turning the beautiful Stamford, Connecticut sky from blue to nearly black. Within moments, my shirt was soaked with sweat as the August humidity crept down my collar. I heard the voices before I even got to the Purdue Pharma building. As I pulled into a parking spot, my ears started to ring. The shouting grew louder as I hustled through the glittering monolith on Tresser Boulevard. The police were already here, shielding the front of the building in a blockade formation. Hundreds of people crowded the plaza. The noise hit me like a wall, and I stumbled as I went into the press of bodies, working my way forward. The ground was covered in shreds of paper, protest messages that people were stuffing into orange plastic pill bottles and leaving on the steps. The officers didn't move. Locked in place, they were there to back Purdue. Standing in the shadow of the building, my sweat turned to ice water. I looked up, craning my neck to take in the whole monstrosity. One Stamford Forum was the mother ship. 10 floors of glass windows and dark chrome reflecting the coming storm down at us. It felt nearly abandoned, even on a Friday afternoon when people should have been coming and going to their jobs. The stillness was eerie, as though the building were listening to us, planning its next move. I felt as if I were looking up at the Death Star for the first time. That's no moon. One Stamford wasn't just a corporate office. It was a national monument to American greed. The 505,000 square foot building at 201 Tresser was stuffed with Purdue offices. This was ground zero. Inside these walls, the Sackler family-owned company had run the numbers, drawn up marketing plans, and executed their strategies. The company committed cold-blooded corporate genocide, rubber-stamped by the FDA and co-signed by the free market. More blood had been spilled in that building than I could comprehend. My stomach clenched with nausea. I felt as if I were standing at the gates of hell. On the third floor, in one of the lacquered panes that overlooked the plaza, I could see figures standing at the window. 3 or 4 people clustered together, holding their phones and pointing down at the crowd. I narrowed my eyes. They were taping us. They were laughing. I'd tear the place to pieces with my own hands if necessary. My voice joined the chant that swelled around me. The protest was a furious hurricane, filling the plaza and battering the windows of the Purdue building. I'll end them, I thought to myself. If it's the last thing I do, I will take this place down along with everything it ever stood for. I got the phone call a year later on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon in September 2019. It was the long Labor Day weekend, and I was at the Bronx Zoo with my 2 favorite people for a last-minute vacation. I let go of my fiance's hand to answer the phone. Sean, who was used to work interrupting our dates and outings, smiled at me and turned away to talk to my mom. They pointed at the red parkas in the nearest enclosure while I pressed my phone to my ear. Purdue's filing for bankruptcy, the voice on the other end said. Yeah, whatever. I got a lot of calls like this. Everyone had a theory about Purdue, and information spread like wildfire between advocates, reporters, and lobbyists. A lot of it was old news by the time it got to me. We all knew the same stuff because we'd worked tirelessly to take down Purdue and bring them to justice for encouraging and profiting off a national drug epidemic that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. No, it's really happening, she said. What I learned in that phone call altered the course of almost 2 years of my life, although it felt like 20. I didn't know what it meant, but by the time I hung up and turned back to Sean and my mom, the gears of history were turning at lightning speed. Within 2 weeks, Purdue Pharma did file for bankruptcy. Before I knew it, I was in a room packed with every person I'd ever squared off with. That day was the last calm moment I experienced for the next 22 months. Life before the Purdue case wasn't exactly smooth sailing, but I navigated the waves with some help from my partner and my friends. I wasn't new to being a disruptor, but I was about to be catapulted to a level of involvement I hadn't imagined was possible for people such as me. Previously, I'd worked to support a range of policy issues and devoted countless hours to advance forward-thinking addiction recovery legislation. I knew what the numbers were in the crisis. I saw firsthand how addiction tore families apart, destroyed entire communities, and killed our most vulnerable people. In the first years of my recovery, I lost more than 24 friends to preventable overdoses. I visited dozens of communities as part of a documentary project in 2016 called Addiction X America, and witnessed the losses sustained by ordinary families everywhere. I stayed in homes with parents who'd lost children to Purdue Pharma's best-selling painkiller, OxyContin. I ate at the tables of families that would never be the same. I vowed that I would bring justice to them and all the people who, like myself, had lost years of their lives to Purdue's rapacious hunger for profits. I told these stories in testimony I delivered to Congress, in front of thousands of people calling for change, and at the gates of institutions with the Sackler family name emblazoned over them. I wrote my first book, American Fix, Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It, which was published in 2018. I talked about the crisis on MSNBC, Fox News, and any other outlet that would listen to me. The book is Unsettled by Ryan Hampton, and it's about the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy and how it failed America. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has You know, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. And welcome back. We're talking with Jen Senko about her new book, The Brainwashing of My Dad. And Jenna, we haven't talked about your dad yet. Tell us about your dad.
Okay. Well, I think the reason why the story of my dad is important is because it's the story of millions and millions of people. You know, and one thing, if you've seen the movie, you know that what happened is that a lot of people got in touch with me to tell me their stories. So my dad, when I was growing up in the 60s, my dad was a goofy, fun, open-minded, like non-political FDR/JFK Democrat. He grew up during the Great Depression, and things notably got better when FDR came in. So that's why there was a lot of Democrats back then. And my dad loved all people, loved to talk to them. He wasn't judgmental. And then he retired in the late 80s. He got a part-time job with a long commute. And so in order to not be bored, he found talk radio to keep him company, and it was who you mentioned earlier. It was Bob Grant, the openly racist and sexist early shock jock, okay? And then after time, his personality, it seemed like his personality was gradually beginning to change. He just became a little more angry and definitely more critical of Democrats. And then about a year later, he completely retired, and he discovered Rush Limbaugh. And that's sort of when he fell in, got a big, giant man crush. He began listening to Limbaugh for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. My mother was, banished from the kitchen during her lunch hour. And then his personality drastically changed. He became enraged about nearly everything, and every belief that he'd had before changed to match Limbaugh's. And then when he discovered Fox, he just became religiously fanatical. And, he found these emails. He started emailing the entire, it's not funny at all, but the entire family, all these suspiciously similar emails, they all had one thing in common. They all demonized Democrats in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So once before, he'd been open-minded and loved talking to, let's say, foreigners to see how well he knew their language, because he knew about 7 different languages. So, enough to see if he could have a conversation with them. He became very anti-illegal immigrant. He was once dirt poor, but he became anti-poor person, believing they all just wanted handouts, and he became very anti-government when it was because of the government that he was able to rise to middle-class status from the GI Bill and other benefits, not to mention that he worked for the government all his life and made a very good living. But Limbaugh and all of this provided him with a powerful kick of dopamine and got his amygdala in full gear. And he just, my dad was just a different person. And it was very upsetting. It was very upsetting. It felt like it was dividing the whole family, like when he just constantly picked arguments. He hated Clinton, of course, because Limbaugh railed against Clinton. and just was like trying to convert us. You know, that's why I say it was almost like religiously fanatical. And it was unbearable. And my mother in her 80s almost left him. One day she wrote me an email, said, I'm thinking of leaving Daddy. Could you help me find an apartment? It was really sad. But I said, I don't think that's such a good idea right now. But instead, what she started doing was researching and checking, you know, asking him to check his sources. And she was the only one who would respond back to him via email. And I don't know how far you want me to go with this story, Tom.
It's fine. I think this is a story that many Americans have shared, and I think it needs to be told in its fullness.
Right. Well, just to show, I mean, this kind of is like spoiling the end of the movie, but that's okay, because I think that the lesson that you can draw from it is extremely important. That is, so anyway, my mom and dad would have these email arguments, and he understood how we all felt. One day they moved to a senior community, and in that move, somehow his radio got broken. I don't know how, but it got broken, and he put it in the garage, intending to fix it, because he used to like to fix things. But until he got around to it, he started having lunch with my mom again, you know, and they would watch
Instead
whatever
of Limbaugh.
was. Right. Suddenly Limbaugh was gone. And you know what? It was such a big deal, the move and all that. He just wasn't in a hurry to replace it. It kind of disrupted those electrical synapses that were going on in his brain. And so they would watch the news during lunch, but it would just be like mainstream media news. And one day my mom had to get they had to get a new TV for the kitchen, and she loved programming remotes. I mean, she would come to my house and program my remotes. She programmed the remotes, but the thing is she had stickies all over them. So when my dad did eat alone, he just watched whatever she had on. So very gradually he began to soften up a little bit. And then one day he went into the hospital for a kidney stone.
Well, hang on. If I could just back up, did she program the remote so he couldn't see Fox News anymore?
No, she didn't do it on purpose. It's just it was too much for him to figure out, because she put these stickies explaining what to do, how press this button first and then that button.
So the bottom line is
just lazy.
He lost access to Fox News.
Yeah, basically,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
So that was taken away, and then so was Limbaugh taken away.
Right.
And he found himself enjoying his lunch hour again with my mom. They used to have great conversations. I remember that when I was little. Like, gee, they always find something to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, one day he had to go into the hospital. He had a kidney stone. He was there for a week. And they had these old clunky computers back then. And my mother said, Jennifer, would you mind going on Daddy's computer and killing some of his email? I'm afraid it's going to clog up his computer. And I said, okay. And I tried doing that. And I said, Mom, they just keep coming, you know. So
these right-wing emails that he had subscribed to, these listservs and things.
Right, which he would often give lots of money to. My mom, I caught her on his computer, not only unsubscribing him from them, but subscribing him to other types of media.
Your mom was one wily one.
Oh, yeah, you know, she judge her if you will, but she had to endure him for 20 years like this. Sure. So, you know, she subscribed into Truth Out and Alternet and Reader-Supported News and, you know, whatever. And when he came home from the hospital, he just continued reading whatever was in his computer. And one day my mom called me up very excited and said, guess what? said, what? She said, Daddy said he likes Obama. I said, what? Nah. And she said, yeah, he did. And then, like, about 2 weeks later, he said it again. And on his birthday, which was October 31st, I went down there with my camera, and she brought it up. Like, so who are you going to vote for in this, election? Mm-hmm. It was the second time he ran. My father said, I'm going to vote for Obama. He's a pretty good guy. He's doing things all right. I think she nearly choked on the birthday cake.
Wow.
And we had my dad back, and he became, oh my God, the sweetest old guy, like singing his old Ukrainian songs and telling his corny jokes. And I got close to him. I would wait on him, and I enjoyed doing it because he was just so pleasant to be around, and he wasn't trying to convert us all the time. And it just, it didn't matter to me, like, whether he was a Republican or Democrat. He said, in the end, I'm not all Democrat, I'm not all Republican. Fine. He just wasn't extreme. He wasn't fanatical, and he wasn't raging mad, and he wasn't, I think, like, what happens is something happens to our amygdala, if I may. The amygdala is the primitive part of our brain, which we relied on, and we still rely on.
It's the fight or flight center, essentially.
Exactly, fight or flight. And it's the emotion center. It's where you process the emotions. And once the amygdala is activated, your cerebral cortex, the front of your brain, is not active, which is the rational thinking part of your brain. So with the amygdala, there's sort of an addiction to anger going on. Mm-hmm. And so I think he had a break from that addiction, and then he just enjoyed being happy. And, that's why
it's a truly extraordinary arc. The arc of that story is amazing. I want to get into how other, what you've heard from other people and what we all can do, what other people can do, particularly if people in their orbits have been sucked into this. We'll be right back with Jen Senko, her new book, The Brainwashing of My Dad, right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The website is thebrainwashingofmydad.com. That's also the title of the book. Jen Senko, Senko, is the author. We'll be right back. So, Jen, tell me about how people, you made a documentary about your dad, The Brainwashing of My Dad. That came out, it seems like it was almost a decade ago.
2016.
Yeah, 2016. It wasn't that long ago, okay. We had you on the program talking about it, and I can't tell you how many times I've referenced it when people call and say, what can I do, what can I do? Say, well, start out by watching this documentary. And a lot of people reached out to you with their personal stories. That must have been a fascinating experience. Tell me what you learned from that.
I learned that it was a phenomenon. I learned that everybody thought they were alone. Now, media are beginning to cover some of these stories, especially since QAnon and the extreme that QAnon goes to, which is even beyond the free market, push and privatization and no taxes and small government. It's beyond. So these stories are becoming more public. And there's a place on our website where people can actually go and submit their stories because it feels good for them. They feel alone. And it's at the point where it's a plague. It's almost like a mass brainwashing. I mean, beyond Jim Jones, kind of like Rwanda, as you mentioned earlier, where over 800,000 people were killed, and they would often carry their radios with them and their machetes. And I mean, it is that serious. It is to me. It's a national emergency. It's a very, 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 very serious problem. It's not just our families that are divided. Now it's the country. It hasn't been this divided since the Civil War. But I am heartened because I used to feel like I was fighting alone, or except for people like you and Eric Bullard and Jeff Cohen. But basically, nobody seemed, like my friends and just regular people, seemed to understand that there was a really bad problem going on. And now, lately, I think because of COVID, I got involved in all these podcasts. Mm-hmm. I have found that there are a couple groups that are actually trying to deal with this problem. There's Sue Wilson, who you might know, of Media Action Center, and she has a very good list of things you can do on her website called Sue Wilson Reports. This group is this other group. It's called DDAD for short, DDAD, Defenders of Democracy Against Disinformation. You can only get them by going on their site. You can't Google them. StopDisinformation.org. Mm-hmm. So they're a newly formed organization intending to fight disinformation in media. And they have several campaigns going right now. And right now they're kind of focusing on Fox first. So one of the campaigns is Change the Channel. Mm-hmm. Another one is Fix Fox Now, where shareholders have a resolution to register as a public benefit media corporation. And another is $2 for Truth with a little civil disobedience.
Wow. Well, I want to recap that.
Non-auto pay.
I want to recap that real quickly when we come back on the other side of this break.
Okay.
I'll be right back in 1 minute. I got to pay some. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on the ground, get out the vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're talking to Jen Senko, the author of The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back. It's also the title, The Brainwashing of My Dad, of her documentary. And there's a nice little blurb on the front cover there. It is brilliant, Jen.
Oh, yeah.
I just saw that.
A friend of mine. Thom Hartmann did that.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us. You've told us where this all came from in this hour. We've talked about where this all came from, how it arose. How it's become basically a giant, not just money-making machine, but country-changing machine. How it altered the actual personality of your father and how you were able to help him recover. We've talked a little bit about what other people are doing in their own families to try to reclaim their parents and brothers and sisters and siblings and relatives and whatnot. There are some organizations that are focused on this issue of right-wing media brainwashing Americans. I mean, when you think about it, what would it take to get you, Jen Senko, to show up at the U.S. Capitol and beat the crap out of a police officer? I mean, it would take a lot, right? I mean, it would take some serious indoctrination. And we're not talking here about just the war of opinions or the battle of ratings between networks or anything like that. We're talking about actual propaganda techniques that produce brainwashing and alter people's personalities and behaviors in a way that is fundamentally not only destructive to democracy, but destructive to them and their families. So in the final 2 minutes we have here, Jen, lay out for us what's being done out there and how can people participate in it?
Oh, shoot. I just wanted to say that there was a, one-party rule plan, vast right-wing conspiracy, if you will, and the way that it got mainlined, it was sort of a confluence of things. Rush Limbaugh and Fox was through media, and that's why media is so important.
Right.
So this one very important thing, this Tuesday, tomorrow morning, there's this group, Rise and Resist. Every Tuesday they're in front of a Fox station near you. Weekly, every week. So tomorrow we're doing a little celebration of my book and Fox's 25th anniversary. So we'll be in front of Fox between 9 a.m. and noon, and I'll be giving away signed copies of the book when one earns one by helping us speak truth to power by either reading a passage of the book out loud or posing with one of our Why Fox is Dangerous signs.
Wow.
And that's at 1211 6th Avenue and 48th.
In Manhattan.
Correct. Right. So, but I think one group to really check out also is this stopdisinformation.org. And I don't know how much more time I have, but there's a lot of things you can do independently. I think one thing is make our legislators make media one of their top priorities. They shy away from it, and for good reason. It's been really scary and traumatic for them to deal with the onslaught of the right, but we have to. So barrage them with phone calls and letters demanding they address the issue of large media ownership and the lies disguised as news. Little things you can do, which a lot of people on Twitter have told me they do.
Yeah, that is absolutely great. And I'm assuming you have links to this over at thebrainwashingofmydad.com too?
Yeah, yeah, there's information on the website as well.
Thebrainwashingofmydad.com. The book is The Brainwashing of My Dad, also the documentary. You can find links to it from that website. Jen Senko is the author and the director and the producer and the writer and everything else. Senko. Jen, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's been great talking with you.
Tom, thanks for having me. It's been great talking with you too, as usual.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep up the great work, Jen. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.